America first sounds like retreat. What followed looked like conquest. Trump promised to pull America home. Instead, American power kept moving outward. Bombs fell. Raids happened. Threats multiplied. Venezuela wasn't an exception. It was the signal. An isolationist president doesn't seize leaders. An isolationist doctrine doesn't talk about running other countries. So what is really happening? Here is the uncomfortable truth. Trump is not shrinking America's footprint. He is reshaping it. Less patience, less multilateralism, more coercion, more force. This is not restraint. It's compression. Power pulled inward at home, then pushed outward abroad. And that contradiction explains everything you are seeing. The military moves, the tariffs, the threats to allies. If this opening already feels unsettling, that's intentional. Because once you see the gap between the slogan and the strategy, you can't unsee it. Now let's slow down. Let's define the problem Trump is trying and failing to solve. What exactly is the problem Trump says he is fixing? In his telling, it's simple. America gave too much for too long. Paid for everyone else's mistakes. Factories closed, jobs vanished, wars dragged on with no victory, no end. For many Americans, that story felt true, not abstract. Personnel, free trade hollowed out towns, automation erased livelihoods, immigration felt unmanaged and unfair. At the same time, US troops stayed overseas, year after year, war after war. So America First became a promise. Stop the bleeding, bring power back home, put Americans ahead of the world. But here's where the logic breaks. You can't withdraw from a world you still depend on. You can't disengage from systems you helped build. You can't turn back the clock on globalization. Trump is reacting to real pain, but he's using the wrong map. And when leaders use old maps in a new world, they don't retreat. They collide. That collision is where the real story begins. To understand that collision, you have to go backward, far backward, before global supply chains, before NATO, before the internet. In the 19th century, America had a luxury, distance, two oceans, weak neighbors, no missiles, no cyber war, no climate shocks crossing borders. Power meant land. Security meant space. So the United States built a simple idea: control the neighborhood, ignore the rest. That logic worked once. When threats moved slowly, when economies were local, when empires were normal. Trump wants to revive that world. A hemisphere lockdown, a fortress economy, no obligations beyond the horizon. But history doesn't rewind. Today, danger travels at the speed of code. Missiles don't respect oceans. Supply shocks don't stop at borders. Trying to apply 19th century strategy to a 21st century system creates stress, pressure, overreaction. And when that pressure builds, it doesn't lead to withdrawal. It leads to force. That's how nostalgia turns into action. And why the first real rupture didn't happen in theory. It happened in practice. It happened in Venezuela. Venezuela was the moment the masks slipped. Not quietly, not gradually, openly. American forces moved. The Venezuelan president was captured. Washington talked about running the country. That is not pressure. That is possession. For decades, America First voters were told this meant restraint. Fewer wars, fewer entanglements. But what happened in Venezuela wasn't withdrawal. It was domination. This wasn't about democracy. It wasn't about drugs. It wasn't even about oil alone. It was about control, about sending a message. The hemisphere is not neutral ground. It is American space. That logic has a name. It's old, very old. The Monroe Doctrine, a belief that says outside powers stay out. Neighbors fall in line. When Donald Trump acts like this, he isn't improvising. He's reviving something buried, not forgotten. If you think this stops with Nicolas Maduro, think again. Because doctrines don't stop at one country. If this matters to you, pause here. Share this, because what looks like one crisis is actually a pattern. And to see that pattern clearly, we have to expose the mechanism underneath it. What looks chaotic is actually systematic. Strip away the slogans, and a clear mechanism appears. Trump isn't trying to manage the world. He's trying to compress it, shrink obligations, shorten timelines, replace rules with leverage. Multilateral systems move slowly. They negotiate. They constrain power. Trump rejects that. Instead, he prefers direct pressure, threats, tariffs, force. Not everywhere, but where leverage is highest. That's why the focus shifts to the Western Hemisphere. Close, unequal, easier to dominate. Venezuela fits perfectly. Weak economy, political isolation, strategic resources. So do threats toward Colombia. So do hints about Mexico. So does talk of Greenland and the Panama Canal. This is not global leadership. It's selective coercion. Pull back from distant commitments. Double down on controllable space. But here's the flaw. You can't compartmentalize power in a connected system. Pressure in one region creates backlash in another. Coercion breeds resistance, not stability. And once force becomes the shortcut, every crisis demands more of it. That's how doctrines harden. That's how escalation becomes routine. And that's why the next rupture wasn't theoretical. It was inevitable. The second rupture came fast. And it came everywhere at once. While Washington talked about pulling back, force kept expanding. Strikes in the Middle East, operations in Africa, pressure in the Caribbean. The map didn't shrink. It flickered. One day, diplomacy. Next day, missiles. The strategy started contradicting itself in real time. The national security strategy said less burden. Then it demanded dominance, balance against China, deter conflict over Taiwan, maintain military overmatch. That isn't retreat. That's commitment. Europe was told to take responsibility, yet tens of thousands of US troops stayed because Russia didn't stop pushing. In the Middle East, diplomacy was emphasized, but bases stayed open. Energy routes stayed vital. Force stayed ready. This is the second crisis. Not a single explosion, but strategic whiplash. Allies don't know what America will do next. Adversaries don't either. Uncertainty becomes the message, and instability becomes the outcome. When power sends mixed signals, every actor prepares for the worst. And that preparation always lands somewhere specific. It lands on people. Now let's talk about you. Because this strategy doesn't stay on maps. It lands in daily life. When borders harden, prices rise. When migrants disappear overnight, crops rot. When labor vanishes, costs move fast. Construction slows, food gets more expensive, services thin out. You feel it before economists explain it. The immigration crackdown wasn't abstract. It wasn't surgical. It was blunt. Families separated, workers removed, communities destabilized, and the promise was security. What arrived was strain. Tariffs were supposed to protect you. Instead, they made everything cost more. Groceries, housing, energy. Power used without balance always sends the bill downward. To households, to workers, to people who didn't vote for volatility. If this feels familiar, it should. Because every overcorrection in history looks strong at the top and painful at the bottom. If this matters to you, don't just listen. Share it. Because policies sold as strength often extract their cost quietly. And the next layer of impact doesn't stop at borders. What happens at home never stays at home. When the United States squeezes its neighborhood, the rest of the world takes notes. Allies start hedging, not loudly, quietly. Europe hears threats instead of reassurance. Talk of annexation rattles trust. Even mentioning force changes calculations. In Asia, credibility becomes a question mark. If rules bend in one region, why would they hold in another? That's where China pays attention. Not to words, to behavior. Pressure in the Western Hemisphere signals something bigger. Power over norms. Leverage over law. Russia watches too. So do middle powers. They learn a simple lesson. Prepare for coercion, not cooperation. Markets react the same way. Energy jitters. Shipping routes feel fragile. Supply chains price in risk. This is how local force becomes global friction. The United States doesn't lose influence overnight. It leaks it. Trust erodes. Coordination weakens. Every partner starts planning for a world where America acts alone. And once that mindset spreads, no doctrine, old or new, can contain the fallout. That's why the real question isn't whether this strategy is tough enough. It's whether it's sustainable. So where does this lead? There are three paths ahead. None are comfortable. First, the optimistic path. America recalibrates. Pressure gives way to strategy. Power is paired with restraint. The United States keeps its influence, but stops trying to dominate every outcome. Allies regain confidence. Costs stabilize. This requires discipline and patience. Second, the middle path. The contradictions persist. Rhetoric says restraint, actions say force. Crises keep flaring. Markets stay nervous. Allies stay unsure. Nothing collapses. Nothing improves. This is drift. And drift is expensive. Third, the dark path. The doctrine hardens. Coercion becomes normal. Escalation becomes reflex. A miscalculation, a provocation, a response no one can walk back. History is clear on this point. Systems don't break when leaders choose caution. They break when leaders confuse pressure with control. The future isn't decided yet, but it is narrowing, and the final question isn't about America's power. It's about how that power is used. Here is the final truth. America First was never a strategy. It was a reaction to pain, to decline, to a world that stopped bending. Trump didn't invent that frustration. He amplified it. But reacting is not the same as governing, and nostalgia is not a plan. You can't rule a 21st century system with 19th century instincts. You can't demand loyalty while threatening force. You can't promise restraint while practicing coercion. That gap between what is said and what is done is where trust collapses. At home, abroad, history punishes great powers not for being strong, but for being incoherent. The United States doesn't need to dominate its neighbors. It doesn't need to retreat from the world. It needs a strategy that matches reality. That work hasn't begun yet. And until it does, crises like Venezuela won't be anomalies. They'll be previews. If this analysis helped you see the system more clearly, stay here. Subscribe. Because the next chapter of American power is being written in real time. And the cost of misunderstanding it will be paid by everyone.